Welcome everyone, this is Jed Schlackman, and for this video I'll be covering a topic that you may have heard discussed many times before from many different angles. This is the subject of fear. To start off, I want to go over a little quick quote that many of you have heard before. It's the quote from Franklin Roosevelt, where he said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." If you stop and pause and consider the nature of that quote for a moment, you can see it's sort of paradoxical. So if you have a fear of fear itself, that in itself is still another fear. So you're still not getting away from fear. You're just having a fear of facing or looking at fears themselves. So we ultimately don't need to even be afraid of fear itself. What we would benefit from is being more conscious, more aware, or more mindful of our fears, of where they come from, of how we react or respond to our fears, and how that may affect our judgment, how it affects our ability to make healthy and wise choices in our lives. Fear is something that's always going to be a part of physical existence for beings that have physical bodies, which of course are seeking to maintain themselves and survive. So for physical survival, fear is actually a useful and valuable tool. If there is something in your environment that truly is a threat to your safety or well-being, then it's helpful to have a sense of fear that will stimulate you to react or respond in a way that would help you protect yourself or defend yourself, or in some manner escape from that threatening stimuli or thing in your environment. So in that context, fear isn't something bad. It's not something that we should be afraid of or deny. It is something that we can be more conscious and aware of, and we can consider how it is affecting us beyond that particular instance or moment where we're feeling and experiencing it. Often fears arise from a subconscious level, so we don't take time to think about what's going on. We just have this innate or kind of instinctive response, which you could think of as a response based on some form of memory that's triggered. So if you've had an experience in the past, or perhaps your soul or your ancestors had an experience before where you had to in some way cope with or respond to a threat, you contain now that memory of how you're able to cope or respond in that other instance, so that you can now more quickly carry out that response in the here and now in your present circumstance or environment. So this is really something useful. It gives you the opportunity to react, to protect yourself more quickly than if you didn't have that subconscious memory. So that gives you a bit of an edge in terms of survival compared to someone or some being that wasn't able to access a memory that provoked fear. So in that context, we can see the value of fear. However, we can also recognize that often we activate or trigger that sort of memory, that sort of fear-based reaction, when the present circumstance isn't truly identical or truly comparable to the reality of the past. So in the present circumstance, the threat may not be as significant, as real or genuine as the one you experienced in another time, and you're reacting as if you were in that past or alternate experience. Yet this reaction now is in some way maladaptive to whatever you're encountering in your present time. So this is why we want to be aware of how fear can influence our ability to think and judge and discern. When we have a fear reaction, that kind of naturally takes our state of consciousness away from our rational thinking and reasoning mind, and doesn't give us the time to carefully analyze, to carefully evaluate the details of a situation. It's there to help us react more quickly. So the downside of that is that if this current situation is not truly as we are initially perceiving it to be, then we can, in some sense, respond or react in a counterproductive way, since we're reacting based upon inaccurate information or perception. So fear has been called the mind killer, since it either leads us into a kind of body-based survival response or into a dissociative type of state where we're kind of detaching from our thinking self, or going more maybe into a spiritual realm, so that we don't feel or experience what's happening fully. And sometimes we're doing that so that we can seek out some form of spiritual or intuitive guidance or support. However, if you project your consciousness into the spiritual plane from a state of fear, you may end up attracting to you some form of spiritual guidance, you could say, or spiritual interaction that merely reflects your fear and reinforces it, rather than providing a truly clear, balanced, or objective view of your reality. So we need to also have access to our rational thinking, discerning mind to have the full spectrum of perception and understanding of what we're encountering in our lives. And if you notice that you're not using that part of your mind or consciousness, then it may be time to kind of pause and slow down, to breathe, to settle your body down, to help your nervous system come back into balance, and to give yourself an opportunity to look more closely and think more clearly about whatever the phenomena you're encountering is. So this is where we can learn to practice more discernment, more patience, where we can realize that fear often does cloud our judgment. This is the reason why someone would say that the thing we have to fear is fear itself, since fear often does lead to some type of impulsive reaction, some type of unwise decision making. We can look at different things in our personal lives and different phenomena or situations in society as a whole, in the mass consciousness of humanity, and see how people's thinking or conscious thought processes are often disturbed or interfered with by their reaction to fear. If we think about something like religion, where religion teaches people that if you do a certain thing, there will be a negative spiritual consequence. So historically, people in religions have been told if they do something that goes against the doctrines of that religion, they're committing some type of sin or evil, and the Creator is going to punish them for that, well, that message puts someone in a state of fear, and in that state of fear they're not able to pause and rationally or logically consider if the information that's been provided to them is really true and accurate. Has the Creator of all life really designated those specific behaviors as transgressions against the Creator? Is there really some spiritual, eternal punishment for having done a particular thing or thought a particular thing? That's something people might not even pause to consider if they've been indoctrinated in a religion and that type of fear has been instilled in them. Another example we might think of is things in current events. You could think of an example like a terror attack, and a major incident that many people could reflect upon would be the 9/11 attacks from 2001, when you had these shocking, terrifying, scary events occur. And when this occurred, people were given a particular story or narrative about what happened and who was responsible, and then about the government doing certain things based upon that in response to that narrative, taking aggressive military actions, instituting particular laws and regulations and restrictions on privacy and freedoms and so on, supposedly in order to fight this threat of foreign terrorism. So in that state of fear, people might more easily just accept and go along with what those authority figures are telling them, and they might not pause and stop and think about the basic narrative and details and information that have been given to them. They might not question how the government was claiming that they were caught off guard and surprised by this attack, even though on the very day of the events they were running drills designed to simulate a similar attack. They had received prior warnings or messages about this event occurring in that time frame. And of course there's a question of how a handful of men with box cutters supposedly hijacked airplanes, and those airplanes, which supposedly crashed into very strongly built skyscrapers, would cause the skyscrapers to implode, to collapse within themselves in a very rapid manner, in a manner that looked very much like a controlled demolition, and with very little apparent signs of a commercial airliner actually going into the building, both in the World Trade Center as well as into the ground in Pennsylvania and into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. So if you stop and start to more carefully look at the forensics, at all the evidence in those types of situations, you may start to see that the facts and the evidence don't support what the official story, so to speak, is telling the public. However, when you're in a state of fear, it's much easier and natural to just accept the initial narrative, to not question things, especially when most other people around you are doing that also. When the mass consciousness, the social consensus, is going in that particular direction, it's actually scary to think outside of the box or norm of your social surroundings, of your social group, of your family, your coworkers, and so on. So that's another fear we have, a fear of social rejection or disapproval, of people thinking that we're in some way being crazy or insane by not agreeing with the consensus, that we're in some way being unpatriotic, or we're in some way potentially causing harm to other people by not agreeing, by not accepting or conforming to the story we've been told and to the supposedly protective measures that are being put in place based upon that story. So there's a lot of psychological pressure to just go along with what you are told, with the initial story or construct that's been put into your consciousness. So in that state of fear, we're very easily programmed, and we saw that with the 9/11 events. Very few people, especially in the beginning, were willing to question things. It's only after many years where the amount of people in the population who no longer accept that original story has grown substantially. So people have had time to move beyond that initial fear reaction. They've had time to start to question things, to start to look at evidence, to start to apply critical thinking to all the different facts and data points and circumstances that surround that part of history. So this happens with many things in our life. It may take a while for us to get past our fear response, those subconscious reactions and programs that get enacted, so that we can start to use our rational reasoning mind more and start to really see things in life more clearly, which gives us more power over how we're responding. We can choose now to react in a more responsible way rather than a more reactive way or impulsive way. So we don't have to fear fear itself. We can truly recognize that there's value in fear in certain contexts and circumstances. It gives us a benefit, an edge for survival. It helps us protect ourselves. However, there's a shadow side to it where it does naturally interfere with our reasoning ability. It clouds our ability to discern and judge things, when using that ability, that discernment, would be more helpful than just reacting impulsively. So if we're able to be flexible, to go back and forth between using those more instinctive reactions and applying a more patient, discerning, reasoning mode of consciousness, then we'll have a wider range of resources available to us to deal with whatever may arise or appear in our life experience. This is something that I would encourage you to consider with any phenomenon in your life. So with anything that's happening in your personal relationships, in your workplace. Sometimes you feel you need to react very impulsively to protect yourself, but in other situations you may realize that those very impulsive types of reactions can create more problems for you. They can lead to misjudgments and you acting in ways that create more undesirable results or outcomes. We can see this in many events in society. One could look at the reaction to the public health concern or threat that's currently predominating in the mass consciousness and see how the reaction to that is likely not based on very clear and solid and thorough examination of science and evidence and a real full understanding of these health phenomena. And so what has been implemented or applied as a response under the pretense or the explanation of being something that's necessary for protection of public health or safety, that this has actually created more problems or worse problems than the initial situation itself might have warranted. For those that are interested in exploring psychology and consciousness and looking more deeply into holistic health and well-being, I invite you to view my website, which is phinsights.com. That's phinsights.com. You can also view some other presentations I've provided on my YouTube channel. For the time being, I want to just wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.